Lahat may kota, di ba? Napakasakit po sa damdamin ko dahil ako po ang namuno sa mga fundraisings. After December season, ang mga members kailangan magtinda ng mga kakanin para maibigay sa mga pledges for Alay kay Kristo, building funds, love offerings, television pledges, tithes, and others. And when they could not provide for their own foods, they would just resort to fasting. Meron din pa akong quota, 10 to 15 million pesos to raise in the month of December alone. I organized the carolers nationwide to meet my quota. We recruited and trafficked our young people from Mindanao and Visayas to carol in the provinces of Luzon and in the national capital region cities. Marami pong estudyante na Nobyembre pa lang kailangan nang mag-absent sa paralan at ang iba hindi na nakabalik sa pag-aaral dahil inuna ang simbahan, inuna ang pagkaroling, inuna ang paghanap ng pera. But nobody questioned where our income was spent. Sa mga buwan ng Pebrero hanggang Oktubre, ang ibang workers na nasa logistics department kailangan mag-solicit na naman throughout the country using the permits of the different associations, Pag-asa ng Buhay, Children's Way Foundation, Tulong sa May Kapansanan, Handog ng Pagmamahal, Pagdamay sa Dukha, Shivers for Christ. The supposed income na dapat ibigay sa mga beneficiaries, sa mga nasabing associations, hindi naman talaga truthfully and honestly na ibigay. Only a little portion of the income was shared to the beneficiaries. Ang ibang workers naman, walang hinto sa pagtinda rin ng mga kakanin na may quota of 500 to 1,000 pesos a day, Monday to Saturday. Ito ang buhay ng mga workers na nasa logistics department. In America, they began to notice my indifference. ICC called my attention, stating there were reports from my assistant in the logistics department in Manila that I had secretly sent money to my family. Then, she informed me that ministers wrote letters to ACQ and reported that I tempted and fornicated with them during my visits to their satellite churches. I was so shocked to learn of the sudden accusations. I also wrote a letter and enumerated the real circumstances of my life with all the ministers I came in contact with in relation to our aggressive fundraising, being the National Logistics Coordinator. However, that was not enough. I was then forced to write a long letter of confession, making it appear that I was a sinner who committed all kinds of sins, including those I had committed before joining the ministry. I complied, believing that through this written confession, I would be totally forgiven from my old sins and burdens and be completely sanctified. In detail, I wrote everything I thought was considered sin I had committed from childhood until the present. I also implicated ACQ in my sins. It had the same tenor of the letter I wrote in Hong Kong in 1994. And this time, he was furious. Then ICC instructed me to revise my letter. I was told not to implicate ACQ and to state that I was the sole sinner and I was filthy. Upon realizing how angry ACQ was, I revised my letter out of fear and stated that I had sinned because I truly was filthy. In detail, I imagined sins.
Ms. Teresita, yung paulit-ulit yung binabanggit na ICC, sino po yun?
Ingrid Chavez Canada.
Sila pa rin po. All right. Please proceed.
In detail, I imagined sins and I made it appear that I had committed them all. That was how stupid I was to obey and exaggerate my story. Just to appease the anger of our leader, Apollo C. Quiboloy, not knowing it would become my death sentence later. My exaggerated story was then distributed to all his leaders and ministers, and they believed I was filthy, I was pervert, and I was wicked, painting me as the sole guilty party, while ACQ remained innocent. Little did I know this confession would lead to my condemnation within the ministry.
And Ms. Teresita, pag sinasabi nyo ACQ, sino po yun?
Apollo Carrion Quiboloy po.
Alright.
October 15, 1998, I was sent back here to receive a punishment through prayer and fasting in the guise of spiritual discipline. And the fasting they planned for me was beyond my imagination. It took me 7 months to suffer hunger and isolation in the mountain of Tamayong in Kalinan, Davao City. They placed me in a small, dark, elevated room beside a kitchen, separated only by a mat and walls. My bed was rough, made of uneven slabs, with exposed nails pressing into my back as I slept. I woke up this morning in pain, with no beddings, and the cold October nights left me shivering. I requested a blanket and a mat, but I was denied. Every day from 8 to 5 p.m., I followed a strict routine, regardless of the weather, enduring hunger and isolation. No one allowed near me, as I was labeled filthy and deserving of this punishment. Members were forbidden to speak to me. I was physically very weak and so depressed. I prayed that God would just take my life. Ilang beses po ako nanalangin na sana kunin na ako ng Panginoon. I started to question God and wondered if this was truly a divine process or simply human punishment. I asked myself, is this ACQ's way of retaliating because I rejected the life he imposed on me? It felt like vengeance and disguised as spiritual discipline. My only solace came from reading the Word of God from Genesis to Revelation over and over again. Every day was a struggle of faith. I struggled to believe that the process was still the perfect will of God for me. I struggled to believe that I really was a sinner and that I was recuperating from my spiritual disease for the lack of faith. That was to justify my present pains and at least lighten my burden of loneliness. On January 8, 1999, I gave ACQ a resignation letter and I requested for a fare so that I can travel back to my home in my province. He did not approve my resignation letter. I pleaded to Ingrid, and like a child, I cried for help. But she remained untouched, telling me that it was a divine process. After that conversation, misery doubled. I had no money, and I was still physically weak, so there was no way for me to go out from the compound of the prayer mountain. Waiting for the restoration was the only alternative at the moment. If not for the comforting words of God, surely I would be totally gone out of my mind. They continually accused me of sins they alone knew, unimagined, that would always lead me into fasting. It eventually hardened my heart because I started to realize that the purpose of doing it was to totally break me down and to even slowly kill me.